Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. We're in the company of Christopher Dickey of The Daily Beast. Hello again to Gregory Viscusi of Bloomberg News. Aida Alawi is with us as well, Moroccan journalist who's with us. Why did I say Franco-Moroccan? Are you French citizen?
No.
Not at all. Okay, Moroccan. There we go. That's for the record. And Robert Parsons, our very own, is with us as well. Neither a French citizen. The president, although maybe if there's a Brexit referendum, we'll talk about that another time. We were talking before the break more seriously about Turkish anger over the German parliament overwhelmingly approving that resolution recognizing the Armenian genocide of a century ago. The president of the Bundestag pointing out Germany's own responsibility as an ally of the Ottomans in the Armenian genocide at the time. And yes, resolutions are indeed about the past, but they're also about the present and the future.
The actual Turkish government isn't responsible for what happened 100 years ago, but it can be held responsible for what will happen in future.
Rob Parsons, what does he mean, you think?
Well, he's talking about the need to be transparent about your past, in the way that Germany has been about its past and the Nazi period. The problem is, if you deny your past, if you refuse to have an open debate about it, you keep repeating the sins of the past. And I think that's the point that he's making.
The headline of a piece I read in Foreign Policy: with Germany's Armenian genocide vote, has Turkey lost its only friend in Europe? Gregory Viscusi.
The timing of this is not great. I mean, I think it would have been better if they'd gotten it over with in 2015, which was the 100th anniversary of the events, but it lagged for various reasons, so it's coming through right now at a rather, to say the least, sensitive moment in relation with Turkey. And it is true that Merkel has really been the European, seems to put the most trust in Erdogan in terms of the accords that the EU has signed. She's really been the driving force behind them.
She needs that deal. He needs that into the European Union. Does that mean that, well, after the recall of the ambassador, this is all going to blow over?
I don't think so. I think from a Turkish point of view, the timing of this is just so sort of bad and aggressive that I think that, I mean, even if it wasn't meant that way, as I said, it was supposed to be done last year, but it lagged in the Bundestag. So I don't think it's going to blow over, no.
Christopher Dickey?
I think it's going to blow over.
Yeah.
But Erdogan's not going to blow over. That's the problem.
Well, no, but that's what I mean. That's what I mean. That's what I mean.
No, the genocide debate, no, I think that this will go the way it happened with France, with other countries, the recall of ambassadors, it goes back and forth, everybody kind of calms the water. No, the problem, let's be real, the problem is Erdogan. And the way he's acting is increasing suppression of the free press, is intense desire to be an Ottoman sultan ruling forever. All that is, shall we say, un-European, and Europe looks at that askance. Now, right now, people have to deal with Erdogan, but they don't like it. They like it less and less every day. And his model for democracy, his model for that matter for Islamic democracy, is one that is now increasingly discredited by his own performance. Absolutely. All of that's very problematic for Europe.
Yeah, I totally agree with Christopher on that. I think there'll be a lot of sound and fury over this, but probably not much more in the long run. But the interesting thing was the way the Turkish government went about trying to persuade the Bundestag to vote against this resolution. There were phone calls made warning about the friendship between Germany and Turkey.
They got one vote in the whole parliament against.
Individual parliamentarians were phoned up, threats were made. It was extremely heavy-handed, and it backfired.
Isn't that what we expect from Erdogan?
Unfortunately,
is that everything he does?
That is precisely
more
what we
and more
now.
heavy-handed.
Time for the forecast for France. Dark and gloomy, kind of like the weather in Paris, where the Louvre is closed and the Crimean war soldier, the Zouave, at the foot of the Pont de l'Alma bridge, is up to his waist in it. 1 week before the country hosts the Euro 2016 football tournament, it can seem like a parable. But before we talk strikes or France's love-hate relationship with its national team, Aida Lamy, let me ask you, as a non-French citizen, how have the natives handled the floods? How are they grumpier than usual, or are they more? What's your experience been?
I don't want to insult the French, but no, I think they've been kind of easygoing about it. because I was thinking about the time when I lived in the States, and whenever there was a flood, it was a huge thing. Everyone was talking about it. The news were all over it. It was nonstop monitoring of the flood here.
And panic buying in supermarkets.
Yeah.
She's not seen here.
Like the French nonchalance, I want to say.
Yeah, I think they've been pretty sturdy, given that these floods have come in the midst of strikes.
Yeah.
You know, that
Everything's going wrong.
I think that actually, you know, they've been pretty stoic.
Behaving like the British, actually, you know, which is a bit strange coming from France.
And you sound surprised, right?
Well, it's not the way they're meant to behave, you know. So, you know, I agree, though, that you know, they seem to be taking it in their stride at the moment.
All right, taking in their stride, it's less so the case for the strikes. It's week 7 and counting for industrial action, sparked by a labor reform bill that, if it sticks to schedule, won't be signed into law until July at the earliest. Yes, there's more to come. Rail workers have used the occasion, by the way, to pile on the pressure to stop an increase in their working hours. Commuters divided between the understanding and the thoroughly fed up.
This is the 8th or 9th railway strike in the last 3 months. That's nearly one strike every week or every 10 days. For employees paid by the state who have secure jobs and a pension, that's really a lot.
Now we came from Lille, yes, and we had a problem already in Lille because we didn't have the right train. We had to stand up in the whole way down to here.
1 week from now, Euro 2016, is this just par for the course? People will just come and that's it, or?
Oh yeah, of course they will. I mean, I think there are concerns about terrorism, and strikes are annoying. But people who are committed to seeing the Euro 16 are going to come and they're going to enjoy it. But you know, we were looking at the Daily Beast. We were looking at the question: what do we write about the strikes in France? And frankly, the rest of the world hears the phrase "strikes in France" and they go, "Where's the news in that?"
Well, the other thing that's interesting is
par for the course.
The majority of French people in a recent opinion poll say they're in favour.
Well, in favor. They blame the government. They blame the government more than they blame the unions for the problem. I don't think that actually means they're in favor of showing up and finding that their train was cancelled. But they do blame the government more than the unions.
In '97, when the country really was brought to a standstill.
95.
Was it 95? Yes, well, I've been here a long time. In 95, I've never seen the French happier than during the strike. It was an excuse to rollerblade to work. It was an excuse to do all kinds of things. They only got really angry and sort of huffy with each other when the strike was coming to an end, and they all realized they had to go back to their jobs as normal.
Aidelami, the headline in the lead editorial from The Guardian, not The Guardian, excuse me, The Economist, was "Stay the course, Monsieur Hollande, hold firm."
Him too. I feel like he's a tourist in his country, Hollande. I don't know. I'm not even sure the government right now has a strategy to get out of this crisis. They kind of put El Khomri in the front.
The labor minister.
Yeah, in the front of the war, and she's getting all the heat. And I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't see any progress in the negotiation.
I find that to be one of the most shocking aspects of this, that they've really used El Khomri as a human shield. I mean, this is a law that was totally written by Valls and Macron, and they stuck the name of a fairly junior minister who had just joined the government in that position. They stuck her name on the bill. Yeah. I mean, she's really being used as a human shield.
But the prime minister has been in the front line of defending it.
But he still calls it the El Khomri law. He doesn't call it the Valls law.
Yeah.
You know.
All right, then there's Les Bleus, the French national football team. Days after winning the Champions League, Real Madrid striker Karim Benzema complaining in Spanish sports newspaper Marca that French national coach Didier Deschamps had bowed to pressure from a racist part of France by keeping him out of the Euro 2016 squad. Back in March, when Benzema was put under formal investigation over his handlers blackmailing allegedly teammate Mathieu Valbuena with a sex tape, the Prime Minister, Manuel Valls, weighed in, saying Benzema shouldn't play. In the end, Deschamps decided not to pick him. Hence, the interview granted this week in The Guardian by France and Manchester United legend Eric Cantona, where he blasted the coach for failing to pick pick Benzema and Nice striker Hatem Ben Arfa, another talented footballer who's no stranger to locker room controversies. Deschamps, he's got a real French name. Perhaps he's the only one. Rob Parsons, is French football racist?
Look, I don't know. I think maybe Didier Deschamps has got a point here, though, because French football has certainly got a history when it comes to disharmony in the national squad. If you remember the South African World Cup when the French there disintegrated, a problem that stayed with French football for quite a long way afterwards. I suspect that Didier Deschamps has had that at the back of his mind when he decided to keep Benzema out of the squad.
I mean, absolutely. Just take one look at the French national team, and you can tell it's not a racially picked side. It's an extremely varied. There's every color in that team. Yeah. Benzema was not picked because he's a troublemaker, because of this question of Valbuena, and Ben Arfa wasn't picked because he's not that good. It's not that. It's as the head of SOS Hassim said, there's enough racism in France not to look for false polemics, and this one's a completely false polemic.
Aida Lamy.
I can see both sides of the argument. I can see how, yes, Benzema did something wrong, but at the same time, he still hasn't been convicted or any. I mean, the justice hasn't decided on this yet. But to me, this is symptomatic of a bigger issue in France of discrimination, which is real.
Absolutely,
absolutely.
Exactly. Which is why.
Yeah, I mean, if a millionaire that plays football, is not to be, to feel sorry for, but it's true that it is a country where if you're Muslim or Arab, you have a lot less chances to get a job, to
absolutely,
succeed.
which is why they should be focusing on real cases of racism, of which there are plenty, and not this one.
I don't think I agree with what you're saying. I just don't see this as being symptomatic of that problem.
Absolutely.
But maybe what is more symptomatic is we saw a rush by politicians from all sides of the aisle to denounce Benzema this week, and some saying, is it a case of scoring points with voters from the National Front?
Well, Marine Le Pen was also one of those people who came out and said Benzema has got this terrible background and what the hell is he talking about? This isn't racism. This is what he did. And there is a real problem because this is yet another case in which a lot of people are going to agree with the National Front because it has a point there. As we were just saying, Benzema, do you really want somebody on your team, a national team, who's accused of blackmailing other people on the team? Really?
Particularly Deschamps, who is a coach who very much believes in the team group and and
but if
hard work. He's not a tactician. He's a real kind of.
Manuel Valls, the Prime Minister, back in March, doesn't weigh in on the conversation, saying don't pick Benzema. Would we even be having this controversy? Would Eric Cantona have written his...
Well, I'm still not sure I know why Cantona decided to talk about this. But, this is an interesting point about how the team, that nobody has names like Deschamps on the team, precisely because of its diversity.
He's quite...
Precisely because of its diversity. It doesn't prove it's the racism of Deschamps.
But it's also talking about... Go back to your point. It's interesting that Marine Le Pen's comments... reflecting, in inverted commas, on the whole instance, would suggest that Benzema go back to Algeria.
When he's not from Algeria. I don't even think he speaks a word of Arabic, does he?
What I found interesting is that when this happened, when he wasn't selected, I was in the Parisian suburbs talking to a lot of young people, and a lot of these young people play soccer and so on, and they were all outraged. I think
that Benzema had not been selected.
Exactly. Yeah. I think on Deschamps did a PR disaster with this. He could have handled it better.
Do you pick Benzema and not Valbuena, the man who was allegedly blackmailed?
It's natural. He's an immensely talented footballer. He's got a big fan base. Of course they're going to be disappointed.
But he's not always played very well for the national team. He plays much better for Real Madrid than he plays for the national team.
And he behaves better.
For Real Madrid at the national. Absolutely.
Well, finally, leave it to the Swiss to build the world's longest tunnel on time and on budget. 57 kilometers long, 2.3 kilometers deep in parts. After 17 years of burrowing through rocks under the Alps, the Gotthard rail tunnel opening, cutting hours off travel time for freight headed from the port of Rotterdam to in the north to Milan and Genoa in the south. The leaders of Italy, France, Germany, among those along for the ride at the inauguration. Gregory Viscusi, here we have it.
Well, you're going to make a point. With Bloomberg, we actually ran a graph. You credit the Swiss that the largest number of workers working on that workyard were actually Italians. So it's not just credit to the Swiss. And actually, a lot of German workers, a lot of Portuguese workers. So
it's raised a lot of issues, this story. Yes, Mr. Viscusi. There were a lot of Italian workers. There were talk as well in Germany how this is a reminder that many countries have not invested enough in infrastructure across the continent.
No, absolutely. And we're supposed this tunnel from the Lyon-Turin tunnel that would have a similar, actually have a much greater role than this one in terms of getting trucks off the roads and onto trains to do the Alpine Passage. We presume it's going to be built, and I think this is it's a moment right now with low interest rates, with sluggish economies. That I'm all in favor of building lots of big infrastructure projects. I think they're great.
Well, and I think Greg brings this up. I mean, I think the environmental impact, the positive environmental impact of this could be really considerable. I mean, a late friend of mine, Sadruddin Aga Khan, fought for years to try and save the environment of the Alps. And one of the things he advocated most strongly was let's get rid of the trucks and let's get more trains moving through the Alps.
Because the trucks go on the trains and go through, so they go from flat to flat. They don't have to go over the.
Sure, and if you go to Chamonix, for instance, where it's trucks going through the tunnel, it's horrendous pollution. So this is probably a very good thing where pollution is concerned.
A good thing where pollution is concerned. Robert Parsons, what does it say about Europe? Because here we have all these nations, and we see Matteo Renzi, Angela Merkel, Hollande at the inauguration, everything, and in the heart of it, in the middle, is this country that is not an EU member. I ask the question because I don't know if you've heard, there's a referendum coming up in Britain.
But this was an EU project. Switzerland may not be part of the EU, but this project is part of these big sort of long trunk routes that the EU is working on. So there was EU.
But the tunnel itself was funded entirely by Switzerland.
Entirely?
Yeah.
I'll name it. But it's part of Antwerp to Genoa.
Absolutely.
Corridor.
Yeah.
Rob, what does it say about the EU of today?
Well, I'm not sure what it says about the EU. This is essentially a Swiss project, but it shows you Switzerland's big advantage is it's right at the hub of Europe, which is interesting if you want to compare it with UK. François Hollande compared this tunnel with the tunnel linking Great Britain and France, the Channel Tunnel, and said it made us great friends, the British and the French and the Europeans. And he said he hoped the British would remember that when they came to consider something in a few weeks' time, with a smirk on his face. But the problem for the British is that they're not at the hub of Europe in the same way that the Swiss are. The Swiss really have an awful lot to gain by this. The British at the moment are in danger of cutting themselves off from Europe. And that's really, I think, the saddest thing about this vote that's coming up in 3 weeks' time, if it goes that way.
Which way do you think it's going to go, Rob?
Well, my feeling is that at the last minute, it'll swing in favour of the Remains. Rather like with the Scottish referendum, there was a lot of doubt about it right up to the last minute, and then a sufficient number of people panicked about the possible consequences and implications, which are largely unknown, to weigh in on the side of caution. I think the same thing will happen.
I guess if you're not decided, you probably are going to go on the side of caution. You think that someone willing to take the risk would know ahead of time they're going to take that risk.
Yeah. Either way, few people gush about the EU these days. Brexiteers often make the argument, we can be like Norway. We can be outside.
Well, that's something for Britain to aspire to. Oh, let's be like Norway.
No, we can be outside of the EU, but continuing to do lots of deals with everybody, and they can point to countries like Switzerland.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think, first of all, I think President Obama was very clear when he was there and saying, if you think you're going to be at the top of the list of our trading partners because of this historical relationship, you can forget about it. You're going to be at the back of the line. Because, among other things, Britain just doesn't have that big a market. And Norway has been essentially a rentier state. They've depended on a huge reserves of oil for a very small population. There's nothing like that in Britain. And I think we have to look at the possibility that there'll be another Scottish referendum if this happens.
Absolutely.
Because the Scots are not dying to stay in a Great Britain that's not part of Europe.
There's also one element of Norway that people are forgetting. That's true. Norway has a free trade and free movement with the rest of Europe. But Norway is not a place where a foreign company is going to set up their European operations, because it's not part. There's a whole series of other accords that it's not part of, whereas Britain is. And Britain is a major center for, a huge number of U.S. companies set up their EU operations in Britain because it's in the EU, and that's not going to be the case after Brexit.
It's all about location. By the way, cautionary note, when you celebrate science, perhaps it's best to not get carried away. The inauguration ceremony included some, how should we put it, original choreography.
It's quite bizarre.
Aida Alami, do you associate this kind of dancing with the inauguration of a tunnel?
I don't understand
It's leaving
art
you
enough.
speechless.
It leaves me speechless.
I get claustrophobic just thinking about that tunnel.
All right. We're going to
Me
leave.
too.
Where was that? That was in the tunnel?
I guess it was at
Seems-
one of the two entrances. Anyway, there you have it. I want to thank you, Aida Alami. I want to thank Christopher Ticky, Gregory Vescusi, Robert Parsons. Stay with us, though. Our Media Watch segment is next.
My favorite part.
And we'll say goodbye to Gregory Vescusi, who's got to rush out.
Okay.
And hello to Emma James.
Hi there. Yes, we are talking floods in Paris, fairly unsurprisingly, because it is the really dominant story here in France right now.
Aida Alami was saying earlier, this is interesting, how when she lived in the United States, floods is like wall to wall. You're flooded with flood coverage. That's all there is in the news. Here they seem to take things more in stride.
It is quite interesting, especially when you consider that Paris isn't necessarily somewhere that you immediately think of as being somewhere that does flood. You would think that because it's fairly unusual, not hugely unusual, but not the norm, shall we say, that people might be a bit more dramatic about it. But what is emerging is one real star of the show, and that is the Zouan. Not a man, a statue. He is the statue on the Pont de l'Alma, and as portrayed here by Hervé Baudry, the cartoonist, he says superstar, and it's got the Zouan taking a selfie of himself there as the waters rise up to his crotch level.
Crimean War soldier.
Exactly. Now, this idea of new technology is one that we're seeing in quite a few places, really. A new word's been created here, the selfie instead of the selfie, because people are so desperate to take a picture of themselves in front of these swollen floodwaters and capture their bit of history. And of course, in the background there, you can see that Zouan statue once again. Here again, this was 4 o'clock this afternoon, huge crowds of people just trying to capture an image. And what some people are saying as well.
It's amazing. This is, what is it, highest in 34 years, and he's up to his waist.
Absolutely, and it is really quite incredible to see. And obviously, with the Louvre shut, a lot of people are saying that where everyone's heading to is the Seine to get this capture their own version of this historic moment here in France. Now, the Zouan actually has his own, Twitter account, would you believe? And he tweeted earlier today that when he's completely submerged in water, then he will do a live via Periscope. So clearly the idea of him being very in touch with new technology there, quite impressive for a 19th century soldier. But if we take a look at 1955 here, this was when there was a large flood in Paris, not quite as big as 1910.
We're headed towards 6 meters 50.
Yeah.
Perhaps more.
Absolutely, yes. In 1955, 7 meters 10. No smartphones, as it says here, but lots of curious people. It's up to you to decide whether you prefer the old version or the new. In 1910, this is what it looked like. But it is worth noting, as this Twitter user says, that the bridge then was lower, as was the statue itself. And this article, image here really explains the changes. In 1974, having been rebuilt, the bridge was higher and the statue was also raised up too by 80 centimetres. So you could argue really that comparing like with like doesn't make sense anymore, because as you can see here, in 1910 the water got right up to his shoulders. Now that would just be sort of midway up his chest. If we look at 1982, where it was 6 meters 13, that's sort of above the knee. We're well above that. There are, of course, fears that it could continue to rise as the night wears on, depending on obviously what happens with the weather. We will have to wait and see quite how high it manages to get, but it would be exceptionally unlikely, of course, for it to reach his shoulders, not only because we're not expecting it to be that bad, but also because it was so severe that time around and the statue has raised. So it isn't quite comparing like with like.
All right, many thanks for that, Emma James. The zouave of the Pont de l'Alma bridge. And again, the Louvre closed until Tuesday, so are the other Bankside museums. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.